June 7, 1945. 10:15 a.m. A medical station outside Oldenburg, Lower Saxony. The line formed in silence. 34 women standing outside a converted schoolhouse marked with a red cross, each clutching a slip of paper that read, "Mandatory medical screening." They'd been internees for 3 days. Long enough to know that mandatory meant you went whether you wanted to or not. Long enough to fear what medical screening might actually mean. One woman, Kathy, a supply clerk from Dresden, shifted her weight from foot to foot, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. She'd been standing or lying on hard surfaces for weeks. Sitting had become something to avoid, something that brought sharp pain and the reminder that her body was failing in small, humiliating ways. The door opened. A Canadian nursing sister stood there, clipboard in hand. "Next, please." Kathy entered. The room was clinical. Examination table, medical supplies, proper lighting. The nursing sister gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me what's wrong." Kathy remained standing. "I can't." "Why not?" "It hurts when I sit." The nursing sister's expression didn't change. No judgment, no disgust, just professional assessment. "How long?" "Weeks. Maybe months. I don't remember when it started." "Show me." "I expected humiliation," Kathy would write later. "I received care." That single word, "show me," was an invitation to be treated as a patient, not an enemy. I had forgotten such invitations existed. They expected examination as punishment. They received treatment as patients. And in that gap, dignity was quietly restored. The moment unfolds with the weight of bodies that have been neglected too long finally acknowledged. June 1945. The war had been over for a month, but its consequences lived in flesh, in the infections that festered, in the malnutrition that weakened bones, in the dozens of small ailments that accumulate when survival takes priority over health. The women who'd been captured in Germany's final collapse had spent months, sometimes years, in conditions where medical care meant, don't die immediately. Everything else, the chronic pain, the skin conditions, the dental problems, the gynecological issues, had been endured in silence because speaking made you vulnerable, made you weak, made you a burden the system would eliminate. The Nachrichtenhelferinnen and Stabshelferinnen, the auxiliary personnel who'd kept Wehrmacht communications and logistics functioning, had lived in barracks without adequate sanitation, had worked long hours on insufficient nutrition, had made do with whatever supplies existed, which was increasingly nothing. By the time they were captured, many carried the physical evidence of systematic neglect. Untreated infections, vitamin deficiencies, injuries that had healed badly because they'd never been properly set. When Canadian forces processed them, military medical protocols required screening. Not for punishment. For documentation, for disease control, for the basic obligation of ensuring that people in your custody didn't die from preventable causes. The Canadians approached this with the same bureaucratic efficiency they brought to everything. Thorough, systematic, professional. What they found shocked even experienced military medical personnel. Captain Margarete Fraser, a military nurse from Halifax who'd been working field hospitals since 1942, conducted the initial screenings. She'd seen wounded soldiers, civilian casualties, concentration camp survivors. She thought she'd seen everything war could do to human bodies. But there was something different about examining women who'd been neglected rather than actively brutalized. The injuries were quieter, more intimate. Pressure sores from sitting on hard surfaces for months. Infections from inadequate hygiene facilities. Malnutrition-related conditions. The physical toll of bodies that had simply stopped being priorities. Kathy's case was typical. Severe hemorrhoids, untreated and infected. A condition that was painful, undignified, and entirely preventable with basic medical care. But basic medical care had stopped being available long before the surrender. Fraser examined her with clinical efficiency. "This needs treatment. The infection is significant. I'll clean it, apply medication and provide supplies for daily care. It will hurt for several days while healing, but it will heal if you follow instructions. Understand?" Kathy nodded, too stunned to speak. She'd expected the examination to be the punishment, being forced to reveal her weakness, her failure to maintain her body properly. Instead, it was simply medicine. Clinical assessment followed by treatment. Fraser handed her a packet of gauze, antiseptic solution, and instructions written in German. Change the dressing twice daily. If pain worsens or you see red streaks, come back immediately. That means the infection is spreading. Don't wait. Why are you helping me? Fraser looked up from her notes. Because you're a patient, and I'm a nurse. That's sufficient reason. She gave me no special compassion, Kathy wrote. Just professional competence. But competence applied without cruelty felt like mercy. I hadn't known medicine could be neutral, just treatment, no judgment. If this moment already changed how you see the war, subscribe, the next will surprise you even more. The medical screening revealed a catalog of neglect. 22 women had significant dental problems, cavities, abscesses, infections that had spread to the jaw. 15 had untreated skin conditions. 8 had serious gynecological issues that had been ignored because discussing such things was shameful, impossible, dangerous. Nearly all showed signs of malnutrition, anemia, vitamin deficiencies, the physical markers of bodies that had been running on insufficient fuel for too long. The Canadian medical staff documented everything, then began the slow work of treatment. Not emergency care. Most of the conditions weren't life-threatening. Just the grinding, unglamorous work of addressing chronic problems that had been left to fester because no one had cared enough to treat them. A dentist, Captain Morrison from Toronto, set up a field clinic and began the process of cleaning, filling, extracting. He worked with the same matter-of-fact efficiency Fraser demonstrated, explaining procedures in basic German, administering proper anesthesia, treating pain as something that mattered rather than something to be endured. One woman, Greta, who'd been a typist, sat in his chair with tears running down her face, not from pain but from relief. She'd had a tooth abscess for 3 months, had learned to chew on only one side, had accepted that this was simply how life was now. Morrison numbed the area, drained the abscess, cleaned the infection, prescribed antibiotics from military medical supplies. Take these twice daily with food. All of them even after the pain stops. Understand? She nodded. Good. Come back in a week. I'll check the healing. He assumed I would still be alive in a week, Greta wrote. That small assumption, that I had a future requiring follow-up care, changed how I understood my own existence. I was not disposable. I was a patient with a treatment plan. The policy behind this care was encoded in military medical regulations that Canada followed rigorously. The Geneva Convention specified that prisoners of war must receive medical care, on the same footing, as the troops of the detaining power. For women in the ambiguous category of civilian internees, the standard was adapted but not reduced. Necessary medical care would be provided according to available resources and professional medical judgment. But beneath the bureaucracy was something harder to quantify. A directive from Canadian Army Medical Services, issued in May 1945, included language that went beyond minimum requirements. Internees will be treated as patients, not as political categories. Medical care will be provided according to need, not according to judgment of the patient's past actions or affiliations. Professional standards apply to all persons in custody. Security through health. Diplomatic precedent through humane treatment. Moral integrity through maintained standards. The triad that shaped every interaction. The days after screening brought a strange new routine: medical appointments. Women were called from work details or rest periods for follow-up examinations, dressing changes, medication distribution. The medical station became a space separate from the rest of internment, a place where they were patients first, prisoners second. Kathy returned every other day for wound care. Fraser or one of her nursing staff would clean the area, apply fresh medication, check for signs of infection spreading or healing progressing. The care was clinical, efficient, and entirely without the humiliation Kathy had expected. One afternoon, Fraser noticed her hesitating at the door. Problem? No, ma'am. I'm not used to coming back. To being expected. Fraser's expression softened slightly. That's what follow-up care means. You come back until you're healed. That's how medicine works. In Germany, toward the end, if you reported sick more than once, they assumed you were malingering. They stopped treating you. This isn't Germany. This is medicine. You're hurt, so you come back until you're not hurt. Simple. She made healing sound inevitable, Kathy wrote. Not a privilege to be earned but a process to be completed. That certainty, that my body would be allowed to heal, was revolutionary. Liesel had been a radio operator, 23 years old, who'd spent 18 months in a bunker monitoring Allied frequencies. She developed a severe skin condition from the damp, the stress, the inadequate hygiene. It covered her arms and back, itched constantly, and had been ignored because there were no supplies to treat it, and complaining accomplished nothing. The Canadian medical staff diagnosed it immediately: fungal infection, exacerbated by malnutrition and poor conditions. Treatable with topical medication and improved hygiene. A medical corporal, Davies from Montreal, provided supplies and instructions. medicated soap, antifungal cream, clean towels from medical stores. Instructions to shower daily if possible, to keep affected areas dry, to apply medication twice daily. It will take weeks to clear completely, Davies said. But you'll see improvement in days. The itching should decrease significantly within 48 hours. He was right. Within 2 days, the constant itching that had been her companion for months began to ease. Within a week, the rash was visibly improving. Within 3 weeks it was gone. The physical healing was straightforward. The psychological impact was more complex. I had accepted that my body was something to be endured, Liesel wrote. That discomfort was simply the price of existence. They showed me that discomfort could be addressed, that suffering could be reduced, that my body deserved care. I'm still processing what that means. Margarete had been a logistics coordinator, 31 years old, who'd managed supply chains until there were no supplies left to chain. She'd developed severe anemia from months of inadequate nutrition, the kind that makes you constantly exhausted, makes your heart race from minimal exertion, makes the world seem gray and distant. The Canadian medical staff identified it through blood tests, prescribed iron supplements and dietary improvements, and scheduled regular monitoring. Captain Fraser explained it in terms Margarete could understand. Your blood doesn't have enough iron to carry oxygen efficiently. That's why you're tired all the time. The supplements will help, but it takes weeks, maybe months. You'll need to be patient. Will I be here that long? I don't know. But whether you're here or back in Germany, you need to continue treatment. So I'm giving you a written care plan you can take with you. Instructions in German. How much to take, how often, what foods to eat, warning signs to watch for. She handed Margarete a folded document, typed, official, thorough. Medical instructions that assumed she had a future requiring care, a future where she'd need to understand her own treatment. She gave me a care plan, Margarete wrote. Not just medicine for right now but instructions for later. She assumed I would live, would need to care for myself, would have access to medication. That assumption felt like a prediction. Like she was telling me I had a future. The transformation happened in the small space between examination and treatment, between diagnosis and care. Women who'd learned to hide pain began reporting it. Not because punishment had decreased but because the response to reporting had changed. In Germany, saying, "It hurts," had made you weak, vulnerable, expendable. Here, saying, "It hurts," made you a patient who received treatment. The medical station became a space of unexpected dignity. A place where bodies were treated as systems requiring maintenance rather than as moral failures requiring correction. Where infection was simply infection, requiring antibiotics, not judgment. One afternoon, several women were in the waiting area. Dental appointments, follow-up exams, medication pickup. They sat together, talking quietly about their treatments, their healing, their bodies in ways they'd never been able to discuss before. Kathy mentioned her hemorrhoid treatment. Instead of shame, another woman nodded, "I had something similar. It's getting better. The medication works." Greta talked about her tooth extraction. Someone else shared their own dental work, the relief of being without pain. They were comparing medical experiences the way patients do, sharing information, seeking reassurance, finding community in the shared experience of being cared for. Captain Fraser, passing through, overheard them. She didn't stop, didn't comment. Just smiled slightly and continued her rounds. This was what healing looked like. Women learning to speak about their bodies without shame, to expect treatment without punishment, to understand pain as something addressable rather than something inevitable. We became patients together, Kathy wrote. Not prisoners. Not enemies. Just people whose bodies needed care. That shared category mattered more than I can explain. If you're seeing this war in a new light, subscribe. The next scene will challenge you even more. July brought persistent heat and a surprise. A Canadian medical officer, Major Henderson, a gynecologist from Vancouver, arrived to conduct specialized examinations for women's health issues that the regular medical staff couldn't fully address. The announcement caused immediate anxiety. Gynecological exams meant vulnerability, exposure, the most intimate kind of examination. Several women refused initially, terrified of what such an exam might really mean. Captain Fraser addressed the concern directly. Major Henderson is a specialist. He's here to treat conditions that I'm not qualified to handle. You're not required to see him, but if you're experiencing pain, abnormal bleeding, or other gynecological problems, he can help. Your choice. The phrasing mattered, your choice. Medical care offered, not forced. Dignity maintained through autonomy. Slowly women came forward. Henderson conducted examinations with clinical professionalism, A female nurse always present, procedures explained in advance, consent obtained at each step. He diagnosed and treated prolapse, infections, cysts, the various conditions that had been suffered in silence because addressing them required vulnerability no one could afford. One woman, Anna, a clerk who'd been experiencing severe pain, broke down crying during the examination. Not from pain but from relief. Henderson diagnosed a treatable infection, prescribed medication, provided instructions for hygiene and care. "Why are you crying?" Henderson asked, not unkindly. "Because you're helping me. Because you're treating me like my body matters." Henderson was quiet for a moment. "Your body does matter. That's not contingent on politics or nationality. You're a patient. You deserve care. That's how medicine works." He made it sound so simple, Anna wrote. "You're hurt so we treat you. No complexity. No moral calculation. Just professional obligation." That simplicity broke something in me that needed breaking. August brought the news of Japan's surrender and the war's complete end. The medical station held a small, quiet acknowledgement, not celebration, but recognition that something had ended and something else might begin. Captain Fraser gathered the women who'd been regular patients and made an announcement: "You'll be repatriated soon. September probably. Before you leave, each of you will receive a complete medical summary in German. Diagnoses, treatments received, medications prescribed, recommendations for ongoing care. You'll need this for doctors in Germany. Keep it safe." The medical summaries were thorough, typed documents listing every condition, every treatment, every medication. But they were more than documentation. They were recognition that these women had futures requiring care, that their health mattered beyond the confines of internment, that they deserved to continue healing after repatriation. Kathy received hers, 3 pages detailing her treatment, her progress, recommendations for continued care. At the bottom, Captain Fraser had added a handwritten note in German: "Complete healing requires 6 more weeks of daily care. Do not neglect this. You deserve to be pain-free." "She gave me permission to care for myself," Kathy wrote. In writing. Official. As if my comfort mattered, as if my future mattered. I kept that document for 50 years. Not as proof of treatment but as proof that someone had believed I deserved to heal. The departure came in September, on a morning that felt too ordinary for such a significant transition. Before boarding the trucks, each woman passed through the medical station one final time for a discharge examination. Captain Fraser checked healing progress, distributed final medications, provided additional supplies for the journey. When Kathy's turn came, Fraser examined the treated area with professional satisfaction. "Healed. Completely. Maintain hygiene and you shouldn't have recurrence. But if you do, seek treatment immediately. Don't wait." "Thank you." Fraser looked up from her notes. "You're welcome. But thank yourself. You followed instructions, came to appointments, did the work of healing. That's what made the difference. You gave me the supplies, the medication, the knowledge. I gave you what any medical professional should give a patient. You gave yourself the care you deserved. Remember that. When you're back in Germany, remember you deserve medical care. Not as a reward, as a right." "She gave me no special blessing," Kathy wrote. "Just medical discharge and the reminder that I was responsible for my own continued health. That responsibility felt like trust. Like she believed I would care for myself because I was worth caring for." What happened to them after is documented through letters, records, and reconstruction. Kathy returned to Dresden, found her city destroyed, and worked for British Occupation Medical Services as a translator. She emigrated to Canada in 1951, trained as a practical nurse, and worked in community health in Toronto until retirement. She specialized in treating patients who'd experienced medical neglect, bringing the same matter-of-fact care she'd received. When asked why, she said simply, "Someone showed me that everyone deserves treatment. I'm passing it forward." Greta went to Munich, found work with a dental clinic serving refugees and displaced persons. She never became a dentist herself, but she worked as a dental assistant for 40 years, helping provide care to people who couldn't afford it. In her desk, she kept Captain Morrison's treatment notes, not as a souvenir but as a reminder of what medical care should look like: competent, efficient, without judgment. Liesel returned to Berlin, worked for American Occupation Forces, and eventually became a hospital administrator. She spent her career implementing protocols for patient dignity, for medical care that treated bodies as systems requiring maintenance rather than moral failures requiring correction. In a 1989 interview she said, "The Canadians taught me that medicine should be neutral. Just treatment, no judgment. That principle shaped every policy I ever wrote. Margarete stayed in the British zone, married a British civil servant and moved to Wales. She raised 4 children and worked as a community health visitor. She kept Captain Fraser's written care plan in a drawer, pulling it out occasionally to remind herself that her health had mattered to someone when she'd thought it mattered to no one. She passed that document to her daughter before her death in 2004, with a note: "This is what dignity looks like." The story does not end with redemption because healing is not moral absolution. These women didn't earn health through virtue or transformation. They simply received medical care because medical care was the professional obligation of those holding them in custody. But care has consequences. Every examination conducted with clinical respect rather than punitive judgment. Every treatment provided according to need rather than political calculation. Every medical summary that assumed a future requiring continued care. These accumulated into an education about what civilization meant when maintaining professional standards under pressure. 70 years later, a medical historian conducting research on military medical services interviewed a retired Canadian Army nurse who'd served in Germany in 1945. She remembered the examinations, the treatments, the women who'd been suffering in silence. "Why treat them so thoroughly?" the historian asked. "The minimum would have been much less." The woman, 94, still sharp, was quiet for a long time. "Because we were medical professionals. And medical professionals treat patients according to need, not according to whether we like them or approve of them or think they deserve it. That's what makes it medicine instead of punishment disguised as medicine. We maintained professional standards because abandoning them would have meant we weren't professionals anymore. We were nurses. They were patients. That was sufficient. Did it make a difference? I hope so. But even if it didn't, we maintained standards. We can live with what we did. That matters." In another interview, conducted in Germany in 2001, a former internee, by then 79, was asked what she remembered most about her time in Canadian custody. She thought for a long time. Then, Captain Fraser examining me and saying, "This needs treatment," like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like I was a patient who deserved care, not an enemy who deserved pain. That moment, being treated as a body requiring maintenance rather than as a moral category requiring punishment, changed how I understood myself. I spent the rest of my life trying to extend that same clinical dignity to others. Trying to treat patients as systems requiring care, not as judgments requiring enforcement. If this story moved you, if it challenged what you thought you knew, subscribe. History is full of moments like this, hidden in plain sight. Don't miss the next one. The examination room where Kathy first said, "It hurts when I sit," echoed through decades. It was not a dramatic space. Just a converted classroom with medical supplies and a nurse with a clipboard. But in that mundane space, something profound occurred. Pain was acknowledged without judgment. Suffering was addressed without punishment. Bodies were treated as systems requiring maintenance rather than as moral failures requiring correction. The Canadian medical personnel who conducted those examinations made no speeches about humanity or reconciliation. They simply practiced medicine according to professional standards that applied regardless of patient nationality or political affiliation. They examined, diagnosed, treated, and documented with the same clinical efficiency they'd bring to any patient population. But efficiency applied with dignity becomes mercy. Professionalism maintained under pressure becomes principle. Standards upheld even toward enemies becomes civilization. The women who passed through that medical station learned something propaganda hadn't prepared them for. That their bodies could be cared for without their identities being approved. That pain mattered regardless of politics. That healing was a process to be supported, not a privilege to be earned. It was not redemption. But it was recognition. The simple, profound acknowledgement that suffering deserved treatment, that bodies required care, that patients were patients before they were anything else. The war had taught them to hide pain, to endure suffering silently, to accept that their bodies' needs were irrelevant compared to larger priorities. The captivity, clinical and efficient and shot through with professional competence, taught them something harder. That pain could be spoken, that suffering could be addressed, that bodies deserved maintenance simply because they were bodies. They expected examination as punishment. They received treatment as patients. And in that gap between fear and care, between shame and dignity, the future became imaginable again.